Hey everybody, how's it going? It's Russell Matthews here. Now, if you've received any benefit since the beginning of the pandemic, whether it be the CERB, the CRB, or even EI, this video is going to apply directly to you. If you've been following the channel for a while, you'll probably already know that each and every single one of these benefits is taxable, and as a result, depending on your income, you may end up owing the government a little bit more this year. And with headlines like this claiming that this year's taxes are going to cause fear and uncertainty, I can understand why there's so much anxiety around this topic, but it doesn't necessarily have to be all that difficult. That's why in this video, we're going to be going over all of the most important information that you're going to need this tax season. We're going to cover things like how you can avoid any potential penalties, how you can use common tax credits to save you money, some new government policies that have come into effect just since the start of the pandemic, how you can sort of manage those, as well as what documents you'll need to get together so that you can actually do this yourself in many cases and not have to pay an accountant to do it this year. So let's hop right into it. But before we do, if you haven't already done so, make sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell to keep on supporting Canadian focused content just like this. First off, I have to say I'm not a licensed tax professional, and any information in this video is either entertainment or for educational purposes. It should be a good place for you to start off so you can make sure you're looking at all the right things and can look into it further on your own. Also, if you're someone who's self-employed or has some sort of wrinkle that makes their tax situation a little more complicated, you're still going to be able to get value out of this video, but I'd certainly recommend talking to a tax professional because these things can get a little bit complex. First off, let's talk about how you can avoid any fines or penalties this tax season. Now, if you've been watching the channel or maybe you've seen it on the news, you'll know that the government has released some new information about how they're actually not going to require you to pay your taxes this year, and they're not going to charge you any interest if you don't pay your taxes if you received any of these benefits that I mentioned earlier. However, there will still be penalties if you don't file your taxes on time. If you don't file your taxes by the deadline this year, you're going to be charged a penalty of 5% of the balance owing. So however much you owe the government, tack on an additional 5% plus 1% each month that your return is late to a maximum of 12 months. So every month that you don't do your taxes after the deadline, you could be racking up more and more interest, forcing you to pay more than you need to. And this year, the deadline for filing your taxes is April 30th. You might remember last year it was extended, but as of right now, there's been no announcement that this year they're going to extend that deadline. So you should be planning for that April 30th deadline. Although I'd recommend you get it done as soon as possible because if you're anything like me, you can tend to forget things over time. And the nice thing is, if you end up owing money this tax season, you don't actually have to pay it back right away if you received a benefit. Now, this could help you out if you are ending up owing more than you were expecting to owe because of the benefits you've received. You can sort of have the extra year to plan ahead so that by that time, you're going to have the money to pay for both tax seasons at once. Now that we know how to avoid paying more than we need to this year, let's talk about the 3 most common forms that you're going to need to get together in order to prepare to file your taxes. These 3 forms are the T4 form, the T4A form, and the T4E form, and each of these serves a slightly different purpose. The T4 form is the most common form when it comes to doing your taxes. This is the form that your employer will issue and will send to you that indicates how much they've paid you over the course of the year. You're going to be able to use the numbers that are on this page in order to file your taxes correctly. The T4A form is a little bit different and it might be new to you this year. This is the form you're going to receive in a number of different cases. If you've received the CRB, the CRSB, or the CRCB, this is the form that's going to include how much you've received from those benefits. It will also be the form that you use to see how much CERB you've received if you applied for the CERB via the CRA. You'll remember that you could have also applied for the CERB, that first benefit that came out back in March. You had 2 options to apply for that. You could apply on the CRA or on Service Canada. So that CERB amount will be included on a T4A if you filed with the CRA or if you applied for the CERB with the CRA. Man, so many acronyms. I hope it's not too confusing. And the third document is the T4E. Now the T4E will also show you how much you received from the CERB, but only if you applied for the CERB through Service Canada. This form will also show you how much you received in EI this year. So if you're somebody who's ever been on EI over the past year, or if you received the CERB through Service Canada, not the CRA, these amounts will be included on this document. For each of these documents, if it's a document that's applicable to you, it should be sent to you via the mail, and you should expect that pretty soon. But each of the different forms is actually sent by a different person. If you are someone who's expecting a T4, that should be sent to you by your employer. If you're somebody who's receiving a T4A, you should be sent that by the CRA. And if you're somebody who's receiving a T4E, you should expect to get that from Service Canada. I know, it's pretty complex. However, if you haven't received these forms, you can actually find them online. If you're somebody who's looking for your T4 or your T4A, you can find that on your My CRA account. If you're looking for your T4E, you can find that on your My Service Canada account. I'll link to a video where I walk through how you can find this information on your My CRA account. And also take a look at this graphic. Hopefully this has all of the information that you need about each of these forms. I'll give you a second to pause it here. Maybe you can screenshot it so that you can know exactly what these forms are and where you can get them and how you can find them online if you need to. All right, let's keep going. Once you have access to the information that's on each of these forms, you should be ready to file your taxes. Now, there are a number of different free options that you can actually use in order to file your taxes yourself without having to pay a professional. And one of these free tax filing softwares is CloudTax. When CloudTax heard that I was making this video for everyone, they said, "Hey Russell, we'd love to sponsor the video." Now, they're a CRA certified software that actually allows you to file these taxes yourself, and they do it in a pretty easy and streamlined way. So if you're somebody who doesn't have too complex of a tax setup, you should be able to do it through CloudTax for free. Now, if you're someone who's self-employed or has rental properties, it gets a little bit more complex, and in that case, I'd recommend getting in touch with a tax professional. Now we're going to talk about some of the most common tax credits that you can use in order to not pay as much on your taxes this year. And we're going to sort of walk through it inside of CloudTax, but if you're using a different software, you should be able to get just as much value out of this as these tips and these pointers are actually going to apply no matter what software you're using. Once you're in your tax software, you should have a spot where you can add and remove slips. This is what you're going to click in order to select which forms you're going to be using for your tax return. As we already talked about, the most common forms that are going to be used for people who used benefits this year will be the T4 for employment income, the T4A, and the T4E. Now, once you click this in whatever software you're using, you're going to be able to load them in, and that will allow you to sort of transpose or write down the amounts that are on those documents into the actual tax software so that you can apply and so that you can file your taxes easily. And many tax softwares will actually have something called CRA autofill. You'll see that right here. Now, the benefit of CRA autofill is it saves you a little bit of time because you don't have to write down each of these numbers or type them into these boxes. Instead, if your documents are only through the CRA, the software that you're using, if it has CRA autofill, will be able to connect to your CRA account and download all of the information into your tax filing so that you're not going to have to write this all down manually. But if your software doesn't have that, that's okay too. You can just take a look at these forms and then write whatever numbers are on those forms for you personally into these various sections inside of your free tax software. For each of these documents that are specifically applicable to you, you can repeat this process, right? If you need to do your T4, you can write down all the numbers in here. T4A, write them down in a similar way, and the same goes for T4E if you're on EI. Once you have all of the information from those T4 documents inputted into your software, you can start thinking about what types of deductions and credits you can use in order to lower your tax return and as a result lower the amount that you have to pay back to the government. And by far the most common tax credit that absolutely every single Canadian will be able to use is something called the basic personal amount. Now, this amount this year is $13,229. So essentially you can subtract that number from whatever your income is, and you'll only be charged taxes on that newly reduced amount. So if this year you have an income that's less than that basic personal amount, it's very likely that you won't be paying anything on your taxes this year when it comes to your tax return, because this basic personal amount will make up for whatever income you had. Now remember, that includes any benefits, employment insurance, anything that you've collected that's considered income is included on your tax return, so this basic personal amount will just reduce that number. Most tax softwares will actually automatically include this basic personal amount, so you shouldn't have to do any work in order for this to be included. I know that Cloud Tax certainly does this automatically, so you don't need to click any buttons or make any adjustments, but on your software, just make sure that they're using this basic personal amount. Another common deduction that you can make on your taxes in order to lower the amount you owe is the T778 childcare expenses and deduction. Now what this does is, if you have any expenses for childcare, like a daycare or a after-school program or even a summer camp in some cases, you may be able to reduce your income by however much you paid for these services. Now, of course, this is going to reduce the amount you owe, because when your income goes down in the eyes of the government, then also the amount you have to pay them back goes down. You should be able to add this to your tax return right inside of your software just by clicking that same spot wherever you add and remove slips. You're going to look for that T778, and then you should be able to very easily write in however much you spent on that this year, and they'll automatically deduct that from your taxes. And this year there's actually been a change to a deduction that many people are going to be able to make, and it's very COVID or pandemic specific. This is the work from home deduction. Now, usually if you're working from home, you'll have to get your employer to file various forms in order to authorize you to deduct amounts from your taxes. But this year, because of the pandemic and because of the increased amount of people working from home, they've actually made this a whole heck of a lot easier. If you're somebody who worked from home for at least 50% of the time for a period of 4 weeks, then you're going to be able to claim $2 for every single day you stayed at home. I know it's not much, but when it comes to paying money back, every dollar counts. Inside your tax software, you're going to want to look for the T77S form, and this is the statement of employment expenses for working at home due to COVID-19. And inside your software, you should be able to enter how many days you actually worked from home over the course of the pandemic. And this could end up reducing your income for this year by $400 as a maximum. And of course, as a result, it'll reduce the amount of tax you have to pay back. Now, there will also be additional tax credits and maybe different programs depending on which province you're in. When you're inside your tax software, it'll likely ask you which province you live in, and it should give you a list of potential tax credits that you can apply for your given province. So in my case, inside of Cloud Tax, they have this provincial tax and credit section, and it'll actually show me for my individual province, which for me, as you know, is Ontario, which tax credits I may be able to apply for. This will give you a better idea of what credits are available, so you can look into them more to find out if you could be reducing the amount you owe even more. Once you've inputted all of the information from your T4 forms, that's the T4, the T4A, and the T4E, and after you've taken a look at which different tax credits and potential deductions you can make, you're about ready to file your taxes. Make sure to take a second look at it just to make sure that all of the numbers that you've entered are correct, but once you've reviewed that, you should be able to, right inside of your software, file those taxes with just the click of a button. It's pretty easy. So as a summary of all of the most important points that we've talked about, first off, the forms you're going to need are the T4 forms, T4A, T4E, T4. Remember, you can go back to that graphic earlier that I made if you want more information on where you can find these forms and who should have sent them to you in the first place. And even though if you received a benefit this year and had under $75,000, you won't have to pay your taxes this year, it is still important to file them because the penalties for filing late, those still exist. Those aren't included in this sort of interest deferral period that the government has announced specifically for this year's taxes. So it's going to be important that you do this before the deadline of April 30th. And lastly, inside of whatever software you're using, you're going to want to take a look at all of the potential credits that you could possibly use. Take a look at all the slips you could possibly add to allow for you to claim as much as possible so that you can reduce your income in the eyes of the government, and as a result, reduce the amount of taxes you're going to have to pay back come April 30th. And as an added point, for many people, it's easy to do this for yourself. If you're somebody who just has income from an employer that hired you or has income just from these benefits, it's going to be very easy just to input this information and do your taxes yourself. But again, if you have other wrinkles that sort of complicate your tax complex situation, like you're self-employed, or you're somebody who has rental properties, or you're somebody who potentially has a student in post-secondary. There are certain credits that can sort of transfer over there. It makes it a little bit more complex. If you're in one of those situations, I would recommend getting in touch with a tax professional to help you take care of it, to make sure you're saving as much money as possible, because let's face it, right now we're all trying to pinch our pennies a little bit. And of course, I'd like to thank Cloud Tax for sponsoring this video. If you haven't done your taxes yet, I'd recommend taking a look at the services they provide. It's free for most people with those non-complex situations, which is a lot of people. So if it's something that works for you, I'd recommend taking a look at them. And of course, if you haven't already done so, make sure to subscribe to the channel. I'm constantly bringing Canadian-focused tips and tricks here, especially when it comes to handling your money in an effective way. So if you're interested in that, feel free to hit those buttons down there. And with all of that said, thank you so much for watching, everybody. I really hope this video helped you out at least a little bit, and I'll see you next time. This channel is supported by viewers like you. Thanks, channel members.